today we are going to be talking with Steve Hutchinson, aka Hutch to his friends, and he is the VP for Security Architecture at MUFG. He is also a board member with IDPro. Thank you for joining us, Hutch.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
So I'm going to ask you some questions. We just want to get to know you a little bit better, know a little bit more about you, about the org, and your perspective on it. So first and foremost, can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the identity industry?
Yeah. So back when dinosaurs roamed the earth in the late 80s and early 90s, I was a programmer specializing in C programming on PCs, which was rare for that time when most people were mainframe programmers. So our team at my company also ran the very, very tiny network that we had. And one day somebody dropped a NetWare 3.1 book on my desk and said, hey, you got to run the network now. First thing I had to do was figure out how to get everybody who worked for the company into the system. And so I didn't realize it at the time, but I was learning identity management and started to do things like develop processes for automated provisioning. I think Ian says it quite a bit when he does presentations. He said, there's no real formal training for this. It's one of the things IDPro is trying to address. That everybody kind of gets into it by backing into the art of identity management from somewhere else. And that was certainly true with me. But then I grew that to do network management and security administration, and was lucky enough to get a job with GE at their information security tech center, which was almost entirely focused on the identity space. And then that's where I really started to meet the people who were involved in the identity industry and fueled my today passion for that.
Yeah, so speaking of meeting people, so I understand you are one of the inaugural members of IDPro. So can you tell us a little bit about that, how you came to the org and became involved with it?
Yeah, I actually joined the thing that preceded IDPro, which was the identity professional mailing list at Kantara back in the day that Ian was helping to champion. And that's what ended up being developed into IDPro. And after we announced, I mean, there was a large number of us who were all ready to, hit the little button on our keys to make sure we could go ahead and get that going. But then I was incredibly honored to be asked by Ian if I could sit on the inaugural board. So I came into IDPro the same way I kind of accidentally wandered into all kinds of things in the identity space. And I think that's what people don't realize. And one of the things I think IDPro tries to emphasize is that there's a perceived barrier to getting into the industry, but it's really easy for anybody, not just to get into the identity conversations, but to really develop close personal ties to the people who are speaking at conferences and people who are on boards and people who are developing standards. I have found everybody to be incredibly open in that space, and IDPro, I hope, is doing more to open up those lines of communication, like through our Slack channel, where newbies and seasoned professionals and standards developers all commonly share a communication space.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, in keeping with that kind of idea about the industry as a whole and the community, what do you think is the importance of orgs like IDPro or other industry organizations? What do you think they mean for the community?
For a long time, the identity community really hasn't had anybody speaking for them. The security people have organizations, privacy people have organizations. There was really no organization specifically for identity people, even though we were a primary contributor to both of those practices. IDPro seeks not just to be that voice, to voice opinions, to help influence the national, international conversations, but to be there to support identity professionals who many, many times feel like they're alone. And there's, for example, before IDPro, there was really no formal educational process, no formal body of knowledge for identity professionals. And now, after years of dedicated work by, brilliant people, we have a body of knowledge that's thriving. And now we have our first set of certification exams, the IDPro exams. So now not only does the identity community have a thing that they can look at for a curriculum, the list of what are the things that I should know, but we're also providing the business community in general with a validation that which they've never had before, which is, okay, well, I can be assured that this person at least has a basic set of knowledge. I think we were shooting for, here's the amount of knowledge a normal kind of identity person would have after 2 years of really working in a specialized role in the identity space. And I think we've accomplished that. I think we've gotten a lot of positive feedback from that test.
Yeah, no, it's a great program. I know it just launched last year. So coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the launch of the IDPro. So that's great. Last question, and then we'll go ahead and wrap things up. But any advice for anyone who's on the fence about possibly joining IDPro?
Yeah, get involved in the conversation. When I started, again, this kind of dedicated identity role, I had no value for things like Twitter and social media. To me, they seem kind of frivolous little pieces until somebody said, well, create an account for your business persona. Look for the people who are speaking at conferences. Look for the people who are authoring standards. Look for the people whose talks and everything you've respected. Just start following them. And as you follow them, you start to see it, and then start responding to them, to start to get into that conversation. And I think people would be stunned at what a low barrier there is to getting into those conversations. It's everybody, again, that I've met wants to have that conversation and seeks out those people. And just sometimes it's hard for the expert and the newbie to find each other. So anybody who's getting started, my sole and primary advice would be make it your business to get involved in the conversation, and I guarantee you people will respond.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Hutch. I appreciate you taking the time today, and look forward to connecting with you again in the future.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.